Steve Harvey was halfway through a question when one of his producers walked up and quietly handed him a folder. Steve read the first page, looked up at the silver-haired man standing at the podium, and completely lost his place. The man's name was Raymond. He was 68, a retired doctor, just there to play a game with his family. What he didn't know was that a woman had flown across the country to be in that building that day. A woman who had spent 49 years wondering if she'd ever get to say one word to him, Dad. It was an ordinary afternoon at the Family Feud studio, the kind of day that felt like 1,000 others. Two families stood at their podiums. The lights were warm, the crowd was loud, and the board was lit up and ready. The Caldwell family from Asheville, North Carolina, was facing off against the Bennett family from Sacramento, California. Everything about it seemed routine. Nobody in that audience had any idea they were about to witness something that none of them would ever forget. At the center of the Caldwell family stood Raymond Caldwell, 68 years old, a retired family doctor with a full head of silver hair and a handshake that could put a nervous patient at ease in 2 seconds flat. Beside him were his wife Marion, his son Daniel, his daughter Rachel, and his younger brother Theo. They were a warm, easy group, the kind of family that laughed at their own inside jokes and didn't mind if the rest of the world didn't get them. From the moment they walked out, the audience liked them. Steve liked them too. He always knew within the first 30 seconds whether a family was going to be fun and the Caldwells were going to be fun. "Now hold on, Steve said, walking down the line during the introductions. "Raymond, Dr. Raymond Caldwell. Family doctor for how many years?" 40 years, Steve," Raymond said, his voice carrying that calm, unhurried tone that good doctors seem to grow into. 40 years in the same little practice. "I delivered babies. I set broken arms. I sat with folks on their worst days and their best days. Best job in the world." 40 years? Steve repeated, shaking his head. "See, that's a calling. That's not a job. That's a calling. And now you're retired?" "Just last year," Marion answered for him, patting her husband's arm. "And I'll tell you, Steve, I love that man, but a doctor who suddenly has nothing to do is a dangerous thing. He reorganized my whole kitchen, alphabetized the spices." The crowd laughed. Raymond grinned and held up his hands like a man pleading guilty. "A man's got to stay useful," he said. Steve laughed his big laugh and moved on down the line, but something about Raymond stayed with him. There was a steadiness to the man, a kindness that didn't seem put on for the cameras. Steve had met thousands of people on that stage, and he could tell the difference between somebody performing warmth and somebody who simply was warm. Raymond was the second kind. What Steve knew, and what Raymond did not, was that this was not going to be a normal taping. For the past several weeks, Steve's production team had been quietly working on something. Phone calls had been made. Records had been gently looked into, with permission, with care. And in a small green room down a long hallway behind the studio, a woman in her late 40s had been pacing back and forth for the better part of an hour, pressing her hand flat against her chest every few minutes, as if she could physically slow her own heartbeat. Her name was Eleanor Brooks. She was 49 years old. She was an emergency room physician, and she had spent the last several months working up the courage for the single bravest thing she had ever done. She was about to meet her father for the very first time. Raymond Caldwell did not know she existed. Not on that stage, not anywhere in his mind. He had no idea that the easy, ordinary afternoon he was having was about to become the most important afternoon of his life. The game began, and the Caldwells were good at it. Daniel had a gift for guessing the top answer, and Rachel had a habit of blurting out funny wrong answers that made the whole crowd howl. Raymond played the steady anchor, the one who calmed everyone down when the family started talking over each other. The Bennetts from Sacramento were good sports, laughing along, giving as good as they got, clearly enjoying themselves even as the Caldwells pulled ahead. During one of the breaks, Steve drifted over to Raymond the way he sometimes did, just to talk, just to feel out where a person's heart was. "Doc, let me ask you something," Steve said quietly, off mic, leaning in. 40 years taking care of everybody else. Who took care of you?" Raymond chuckled. "Marion. And before her, honestly, nobody much. I was kind of on my own when I was young." "On your own how?" Steve asked. Raymond shrugged. Lost my folks early. Worked my way through school. Worked nights. Studied days. There was a stretch there in my early 20s where I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He smiled, a little distant now, remembering. But that's how it builds character, right? You come up hard. You don't take the soft years for granted. Steve nodded slowly. He filed that away. He was learning the shape of this man's life, and he knew, in a way Raymond did not, that the shape of it was about to change. You ever wonder, Steve asked carefully, about the people you lost touch with? Coming up like that? Moving around so much? Raymond was quiet for a second. Something flickered across his face, there and then gone. All the time, he admitted. There's folks I think about that I never got to say a proper goodbye to. People who were good to me when I had nothing. I never paid them back. Never even thanked some of them right. He looked at Steve. You get to my age, Steve, you carry a lot of unfinished business. That's just the truth of it. The stage manager called places, and Steve squeezed Raymond's shoulder and walked back to his mark. But his throat was tight, and he just knew, that the next hour was going to be one he'd remember for the rest of his life. The game continued. The Caldwells won the 3rd round on a question about things people forget at the grocery store, with Rachel shouting, "Milk!" so loud that the whole audience cracked up. They were a good team. They were having the time of their lives. And the entire time, none of them had any idea that a few hundred feet away, a woman who shared Raymond's eyes, Raymond's hands, and Raymond's quiet, steady way of moving through the world was waiting to walk into their lives. When they reached a natural break in the game, Steve's energy shifted. The people who knew him well could see it. He grew a little more still, a little more deliberate. He walked to the center of the stage, and instead of teeing up the next round, he turned to the Caldwell family with a softness that made the whole studio quiet down on its own. Now, I want to do something a little different, Steve said. Y'all have been a joy, an absolute joy. And before we go any further, I want to talk to your daughter for a second. Rachel, come here, sweetheart. Rachel stepped forward, looking a little nervous, and glanced back at her family. Rachel, Steve said gently, you reached out to our show, didn't you? A few months back. The studio went very still. Raymond's brow furrowed. He looked at his daughter. Rachel's eyes were already filling with tears. I did, Steve, she said, her voice shaking. I did. Rachel? Raymond said quietly. What's he talking about, honey? Rachel turned to face her father, and the tears spilled over. Daddy, she said, I have to tell you something, and I need you to know that nobody did anything wrong, okay? Nobody. Not you, not Mom, nobody. I just found out something, and it's a good thing, Daddy. It's the best thing. Raymond's face had gone pale. Marion reached for his hand. The audience didn't make a sound. A few months ago, Rachel continued, I took one of those DNA tests, just for fun, just to see where our family came from, you know? I thought it'd be interesting. She wiped her eyes, and the results came back, and there was a match I didn't understand at first. A close match, closer than a cousin, a lot closer. Raymond stared at his daughter. Rachel, what are you saying? It was a half-sister, Daddy, Rachel whispered. I have a half-sister, which means you have a daughter, one you never knew about. The silence in that studio was the loudest thing in the world. Raymond shook his head slowly, the way a man does when his mind simply cannot fit itself around a thing. No, he said. No, honey, that's not. There's some kind of mistake. I would have known. I would have known. Steve stepped in, his voice low and kind. Doc, Raymond, can I tell you what we found? Can I tell you the story? Because I promise you, it's a beautiful story. And I promise you, nobody in it did anything wrong. Raymond looked at Steve, his eyes wet now, his hands trembling slightly. He nodded. When you were young, Steve said gently, back in your early 20s, when you were coming up hard, working nights, studying days, you knew a young woman. Her name was Caroline. Raymond's breath caught. The name landed on him like a hand on his shoulder. Caroline, he repeated, barely audible. Caroline Hayes. That's right, Steve said softly. You two were close, weren't you? For a while there. Raymond's eyes were far away now, 50 years gone. "We were," he said. "We were kids. We didn't have anything. I was trying to get into medical school, working every hour I could. Her family moved away, across the country. We lost touch. It happened so fast." His voice broke. "I always wondered what happened to her. I looked for her, years later, but the trail was cold. People disappeared back then. No internet, no way to find anybody who didn't want to be found." "She didn't disappear because she was angry at you," Steve said. "I want you to hear that. From everything we've learned, she was a good woman who got scared. She was young, she was alone, her family had moved her halfway across the country, and she found out she was expecting." Raymond's whole body went still. "She made a choice," Steve continued. "The kind a frightened young person makes when they think they're protecting everybody. She decided to raise that baby on her own and not tell you. Not because you weren't good enough. From what we hear, she always said you were the kindest young man she ever knew. She got swept up in a hard moment, and a hard moment turned into a year, and a year turned into a life, and she never found the way back to telling you." Tears were rolling freely down Raymond's face now. Marion had both arms around him. Daniel was wiping his eyes. The audience was utterly silent, every person leaning forward. "She married a good man a few years later," Steve said. "A man who raised that little girl as his own and loved her with his whole heart. That little girl grew up happy. She grew up loved. She never wanted for anything, but there was always a question in her, Raymond. A question about where the other half of her came from." Raymond pressed a shaking hand to his mouth. "And a few months ago," Steve said, "that question got an answer. Your daughter Rachel's DNA matched with hers. And when she found out who her father was, when she found out what kind of man he was, she reached out to us because she wanted to meet you, and she wanted to do it in a way she'd never forget. Raymond could barely get the words out. "She's alive? She wants to meet me?" "Raymond," Steve said, and his own voice cracked now. "She's here. She's backstage. She's been waiting her whole life for this. Her name is Eleanor." Raymond made a sound that wasn't quite a word. His knees buckled, and Daniel and Theo caught him on either side and held him up. 49 years, Steve said quietly. 49 years you had a daughter out there in the world, and you never knew. And now, she's standing about 100 feet away, and she wants nothing in the world except to meet her dad. He looked toward the wings. "Raymond, would you like to meet your daughter?" Raymond couldn't speak. He just nodded, over and over, his hands still pressed to his mouth, tears streaming down his face. Steve turned toward the side of the stage. "Eleanor," he called gently. "Eleanor, come on out, sweetheart. Come meet your father." For a moment, nothing happened. The whole studio held its breath. And then she walked out. Eleanor Brooks stepped into the lights, wearing the long white coat of a physician, her name stitched in blue thread over the chest pocket. She had told the producers she wanted to wear it. She wanted her father, whoever he turned out to be, to see her exactly as she was, to see the person all those years had made her into. She had a stethoscope folded in her pocket the way she carried it every day at the hospital. And the moment she stepped onto that stage, a gasp went through the entire audience. Because she had Raymond's face, she had his eyes, that same calm, kind, intelligent set to them. She had his silver-threaded dark hair. She had the exact same way of holding her shoulders, slightly squared, slightly braced, the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime walking into rooms where people needed them to be strong. She didn't have to say a word. Anyone in that building could have looked at the two of them and known. Raymond stared at her like a man seeing a ghost and a miracle at the same time. "Hi," Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling. "Hi, Dad." And that was it. That was the word that broke the dam. Raymond pulled away from his sons, took 3 unsteady steps forward, and met his daughter in the center of the stage. For 1 second, they just looked at each other. Two people who had lived 49 years apart, and yet somehow had the same eyes, the same hands, the same heart. And then Raymond reached out and pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor wrapped her arms around her father, and they held on to each other like they were both afraid the floor might disappear from under them. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Marion was sobbing into Rachel's shoulder. Daniel had his arm around his brother. Even the Bennett family from Sacramento, who had never met any of these people before that afternoon, stood at their podium with tears running down their faces. Steve Harvey had to turn his back to the camera for a long moment and press his handkerchief to his eyes. "I'm sorry," Raymond kept saying into his daughter's hair. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. If I had known, I would have walked across the whole country to find you. I would have." "I know," Eleanor whispered, holding him tighter. "I know, Dad. Nobody told you. I know. It's okay. We're here now. We're here now." They stood like that for a long, long time. The cameras kept rolling, but nobody cared about the game anymore. Steve had completely abandoned the format. There were no points, no board, no fast money. There was just a father and a daughter finding each other after half a century, and a room full of people who would carry the memory of it for the rest of their lives. When they finally stepped back, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, Raymond reached up and touched her face the way you touch something you can't believe is real. "Let me look at you," he said. "Let me just look at you." He took in the white coat, the name over the pocket, the stethoscope. His eyes welled up all over again. "You're a doctor." Eleanor laughed through her tears and nodded. "Emergency medicine. Going on 20 years now." Raymond pressed his hand to his heart. 40 years I was a doctor. 40 years. And I never knew." He shook his head in wonder. "I never knew there was somebody out there with my blood doing the exact same thing. Taking care of people. On their worst days and their best days." "I didn't know either," Eleanor said. "Not until a few months ago. And when I found out, Dad, when I found out you were a family doctor for 40 years, Her voice broke. "I sat down on the floor of my kitchen and I cried. Because I always wondered why I felt so pulled toward medicine. Mom and my stepdad, they were both teachers, wonderful people. But it never quite explained where it came from in me. And then I found out about you, and it was like a question I'd been asking my whole life finally got answered." Steve stepped forward, wiping his eyes, his voice thick. "You're telling me," he said, "that both of you spent your whole lives healing people, not knowing the other one was out there doing the exact same thing?" "Looks that way," Raymond said, still holding tight to his daughter's hand. "Lord have mercy," Steve said softly, shaking his head. "Some things you can't explain. You just can't." He guided them both over to sit on the steps of the stage, the way he sometimes did when the moment got too big for standing. Marion came and sat beside her husband, and after a moment of hesitation, she reached across him and took Eleanor's hand too. "I want you to know something," Marion said, her voice steady even through her tears. "I have loved this man for 35 years. And the best thing about him, the very best thing, is how big his heart is. There has always been more than enough room in it. And there is more than enough room in it for you, sweetheart. We're not losing anything today. We're gaining you. You understand me? You're not a stranger. You're family. You're our family now." Eleanor pressed her free hand to her mouth and nodded, unable to speak. Steve let the moment breathe. Then, gently, he said, "Eleanor, tell us about your mom. Tell us about Caroline." Eleanor took a breath and steadied herself. "My mom she's 70 now. She's doing well. She's been retired from teaching for a few years." She looked at her father carefully. "She knows I'm here today, Dad. She wanted me to tell you something." Raymond braced himself. "She said to tell you that you were the kindest person she ever knew," Eleanor said softly. "She said she was young and she was scared and she didn't know how to undo a choice once she'd made it. She said the longer she waited, the more impossible it felt. And she said she spent a lot of years wishing she'd been braver." Eleanor's voice trembled. "But she also said she watched me grow up, and every time I did something kind, every time I chose to take care of somebody instead of myself, she saw you. She said you were in me the whole time, even when I didn't know your name." Raymond closed his eyes, and tears slipped down his weathered face. "Tell her," he said, his voice barely holding together. "Tell her I'm not angry. Tell her I could never be angry at the woman who raised this daughter into who she is. Tell her thank you. Just thank you." The studio was so quiet you could hear people sniffling all the way up in the back rows. "And your stepfather?" Steve asked gently. The man who raised you? Eleanor smiled, a warm, full smile. His name is Walter. He's a wonderful man. He's the one who taught me how to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and walked me down the aisle at my wedding. She looked at Raymond. I want you to know that, Dad. I had a good childhood. I want you to know I wasn't sad and lonely all those years. I was loved. Walter loved me like I was his own. Good, Raymond said firmly, nodding. Good. That's what I'd have wanted for you. A man who loved you. I'm grateful to him. I owe that man more than I could ever say. He's happy I found you, Eleanor said. He really is. He said a heart can hold more than one father. He said finding you doesn't take anything away from us. It just adds. Steve put his hand over his own heart. Now that, he said, that's a big man right there. That's a man secure in his own love. Lord. The two families had drifted closer together now, the Caldwells and Eleanor, forming a loose circle on the steps of the stage. Daniel, Raymond's son, leaned forward. So wait, Daniel said, half laughing, half crying. I have a big sister now? I'm the baby of the family? I've been the baby my whole life? And now I find out I've got an older sister? Eleanor laughed. Looks like it. This is the best day of my life, Daniel said, completely serious, and the whole row laughed and cried at the same time. Rachel reached across and took Eleanor's hand. I'm the one who found you, she said softly. When I saw that match, I didn't sleep for 3 days. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if I tell Dad and it breaks his heart? But then I thought about who my dad is. I thought about how he spent his whole life helping people find their way through the hardest things. And I thought, if anybody can handle a beautiful surprise, it's him. She squeezed Eleanor's hand. I'm so glad I was right. I'm so glad you're here. I've wanted a sister my whole life. I always wanted a sister too, Eleanor said, and the two women embraced. Steve stood up and addressed the audience, his voice full. You know, in all my years doing this show, I have seen just about everything. I've seen families argue. I've seen families laugh. I've seen people win big, and I've seen people lose with grace. But every once in a while, something happens on this stage that reminds me what we're really doing here. We're not just playing a game. We're bringing people together. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we got to watch a family grow right before our eyes. The audience burst into applause, a long rolling wave of it, and many of them were on their feet. When it settled, Steve turned back to Raymond and Eleanor. Now, I gotta ask, because I've been sitting here noticing things. The two of you sit the same way. You ever notice that? Look down. Look at your feet. They both looked. Both of them had their ankles crossed the exact same way, left over right, leaning forward with their elbows on their knees. They burst out laughing. I do that all the time at work, Eleanor said. My nurses make fun of me for it. Your father does that exact same thing watching the football game, Marion said, wiping her eyes and laughing. Exact same thing. I've been married to him for 35 years and I'm sitting here with chills. Tell me more, Steve said, sitting back down, fully a man enjoying himself now. What else? Come on, let's find out how deep this thing goes. And so they started comparing. It turned into something almost like a game, but a tender one. Both Raymond and Eleanor were left-handed. Both of them, it turned out, drank their coffee black, no sugar, and both of them couldn't start the day without it. Both of them had a habit of humming when they concentrated, an old song, the same kind of old standards. You hum when you're filling out charts, Eleanor said, pointing at her father, delighted. Don't you? I bet you do. My nurses for 40 years complained about it, Raymond said, laughing. Said I drove them crazy. Mine too, Eleanor cried. Mine too. The whole studio was laughing and crying at once now, completely swept up in it. Both doctors, Steve said, marveling. Both left-handed, both hum the same songs, both crossing your ankles the same way, both drinking that bitter black coffee. He shook his head. Folks, you can study DNA in a lab all you want, but you sit two people next to each other who never met and watch them be the same person? That's something a microscope can't show you. Can I tell you something? Eleanor said, turning to her father, suddenly more serious. There's a thing I do at the hospital. When I have a patient who's really scared, really frightened, I sit on the edge of the bed, and I take their hand and I just talk to them for a minute. Not about medicine, about anything. The weather, their grandkids, anything, just to let them know somebody sees them as a person and not a chart. She paused. I got written up for it once, early in my career. A supervisor said I spent too much time talking and not enough time moving on to the next patient, and I never stopped doing it anyway. I couldn't. It felt like the most important part of the whole job. Raymond's eyes filled again, and he started to laugh, a soft, amazed laugh. I got reprimanded for the same exact thing, he said, 45 years ago. A senior doctor told me I'd never make it if I sat with every patient like they were the only one in the building. He reached over and took her hand. I never stopped either. I couldn't either. It felt like the whole reason I went into it. The two of them just looked at each other, hand in hand, two people who had somehow lived the same life on opposite sides of the country. It's in the blood, Steve said quietly, almost to himself. Some things are just in the blood. He let that sit for a moment. Then he turned and gestured to the Bennett family from Sacramento, who had been standing there the entire time, watching, crying right along with everybody else. Now, I have not forgotten about you, good folks, Steve said warmly. You came here to play a game, and instead you got to witness a miracle. And I want to thank you for being so gracious about it. Some folks might have been upset their game got interrupted. You stood there and cried with us. That tells me everything I need to know about you. The Bennett patriarch, a big man with kind eyes named Frank, shook his head. Steve, we wouldn't trade this for anything. We'll be telling our grandkids about this for the rest of our lives. We got to be here for this. That's a gift. Then let me give you a gift back, Steve said. He turned to his producers. I don't want anybody walking off this stage feeling like they lost today. Nobody loses today. Both families win. Both families get the grand prize. The Caldwells and the Bennetts, you're all walking out of here winners. The audience erupted. The Bennetts looked stunned, hugging each other, and Frank put his hand over his heart and mouthed, "Thank you." And, Eleanor, Steve said, turning back to her, you came here today not for a game, not for a prize, but for something money can't buy. You came here to find your dad. And you found him. He smiled, his eyes wet. So, I'm not going to insult that by treating it like a prize, but I am going to do this. My foundation is going to make a donation in both your names, your name, and your father's to a fund that helps young people who can't afford it get through medical school. Because the world needs more doctors like the two of you. Doctors who sit on the edge of the bed and hold a scared person's hand. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, and Raymond bowed his head, overwhelmed. Steve, you don't have to, Raymond started. I know I don't have to, Steve said gently. That's how I know I want to. Now, hush, Doc. Let an old man do something nice. The whole studio laughed through their tears. Steve let things settle again, then leaned forward, his voice softer now, more intimate, the voice he used for the moments that mattered most. Eleanor, he said, you wore that white coat out here today. You told my producers you wanted to. Tell me why. Eleanor looked down at the coat, smoothing the lapel with her hand, and took a steadying breath. Because I didn't know who my father was going to be, she said. I knew his name. I knew he was a doctor, but I didn't know him. I didn't know if he'd want me. I didn't know if I'd be a disappointment, or a shock, or an unwelcome surprise. And I thought, whatever happens, whoever he is, I want him to see me as I really am. Not dressed up, not pretending, just me, the person I actually became. She looked up at her father. I wanted him to be able to look at me and see something he recognized, something he could be proud of, even if he'd never met me. I wanted him to see that I turned out okay. Raymond reached over and gently took the edge of her white coat between his fingers, the way a man touches something sacred. Look at this, he said, his voice breaking. My whole career, I wore one of these. 40 years. And it's the proudest thing I ever did with my life, helping people. He looked into his daughter's eyes. And now I find out that the proudest thing I ever did, somebody else was doing it too. Somebody I made, without my even knowing. Eleanor, I have never in my life been prouder of anything than I am of you right this second. And I just met you 10 minutes ago. He shook his head. I'm prouder of you than I am of 40 years of my own work. Do you understand me? You're the best thing I ever did, and I didn't even do it on purpose." Eleanor fell into his arms, and the two of them held each other, and the entire studio rose to its feet, applauding through their tears. When they parted, Steve gave them a moment, then asked gently, "What happens now? When y'all walk out of here today?" Raymond and Eleanor looked at each other. "I want to know everything," Raymond said. "Every birthday I missed, every school play, your wedding day. I want to see pictures. I want to hear all of it. I know I can't get those years back, but I want to know them. I want to know who you were, so I can know who you are." "I'll tell you all of it," Eleanor promised. "And I want to know you too. I want to know everything about your 40 years. I've got so many questions. I've been treating patients for 20 years with nobody to call who'd really understand, nobody who'd been there." Her voice trembled. "I always thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a parent who did this job, who got it? And it turns out I had one the whole time. I just didn't know." "You can call me any time," Raymond said, "day or night. You have a hard case, a patient you can't stop thinking about, a bad day, a good day, you call your old man. I'll be there. I'll be there from now on, for every single one. I missed 49 years of bad days. I'm not missing one more." "Promise?" Eleanor whispered. "On my life," Raymond said. Steve had to step away from them for a second, overcome. When he came back, he wiped his face and laughed at himself. "I have hosted this show a long time," he said. "A long time. And I am supposed to be a professional. And I am standing up here crying like a baby." He gestured at the whole studio. "But look around. Everybody's crying. Cameramen are crying. My producers are crying. I think it's allowed today. I think today's a day you're allowed to cry." He let everyone catch their breath for a moment. Then his face brightened with an idea. "Now, I happen to know something," Steve said, a twinkle coming back into his eye. "I happen to know that our Eleanor brought something with her today. Eleanor, you want to show your dad what you brought?" Eleanor smiled and reached into the deep pocket of her white coat and pulled out a small photo album worn soft at the corners. Her hands were shaking. "I didn't know if I'd be brave enough to give you this," she said to her father, "but I made it for you, on the plane out here. It's my whole life, every picture I could find. I thought, if he wants me, if this goes the way I'm praying it goes, I want him to be able to flip through it and see the parts he missed." Raymond took the album like it was made of glass. He opened it to the first page, and there was a photo of a tiny baby girl with a shock of dark hair, swaddled in a hospital blanket. "That's me," Eleanor said softly. "Day one." Raymond made a sound, half a laugh and half a sob, and pressed his fingers to the photo. "Look at all that hair," he said. "I had that exact same head of hair as a baby. My mama used to say I came out looking like I needed a barber." He turned the page. A little girl on a tricycle, a gap-toothed school portrait, a teenager in a graduation cap and gown. "First in my class," Eleanor said, pointing. "High school." "Same," Raymond whispered. "First in mine, too. Worked 2 jobs the whole time." He kept turning. College, medical school. Eleanor in a white coat for the very first time, beaming, holding up a diploma. "That was the proudest day of my life up until then," Eleanor said. "The day I became a doctor. I wished so hard that day that I had somebody to share it with who'd understand what it meant. I had Mom and Walter, and they were so proud, but they couldn't quite know what it felt like to finally be the thing you fought your whole life to be. Anyone." "I know exactly what it felt like," Raymond said, his voice thick. "I remember my white coat ceremony, like it was this morning. I stood there and I thought, somebody like me, who came up with nothing. I made it. I actually made it." He looked at her. "And now I'm finding out that on the other side of the country, you were standing in your own ceremony, feeling the exact same thing, wishing for the exact same person to be there. And neither one of us knew." He shook his head slowly. "All those years we were both wishing for somebody who understood, and it was each other the whole time." He turned to the last few pages, and there was a wedding photo, Eleanor radiant in white, an older man with kind eyes giving her away. "That's Walter," she said gently, "walking me down the aisle, Raymond looked at the photo of the man who had raised his daughter for a long, quiet moment. Then he did something that surprised the whole studio. He took Eleanor's phone from her hand. "Can we call him?" Raymond asked. "Right now? Can we call Walter?" Eleanor's eyes filled. "He's watching at home. He said he'd be watching." "Then let's call him," Raymond said. The producers got the call connected and put it through the studio speakers so the whole room could hear. The phone rang twice, and then a warm, slightly gravelly voice came through. "Eleanor?" Walter said. "Sweetheart, is that you? I'm watching right now. I can barely see the screen for crying." "Walter," Eleanor said, laughing and wiping her eyes. "Walter, there's somebody who wants to talk to you." There was a pause. And then Raymond leaned toward the phone. "Walter," Raymond said, his voice unsteady but full. "My name's Raymond. I don't even know how to start this. I just want to say thank you. You raised my daughter. You loved her when I couldn't, because I didn't know to. You were her dad when she needed one, and I will spend the rest of my life grateful to you for that. You're a better man than I'll ever be able to thank." There was a long silence on the line. When Walter spoke again, his voice was thick. "Raymond," Walter said, "I've prayed for this day, for that girl, her whole life. She had a hole in her she couldn't fill, and I couldn't fill it for her, no matter how much I loved her. And now, you can. That's not me losing a daughter, son. That's her heart getting bigger. There's no losing in love. There's only more of it." He cleared his throat. "You take good care of her now. We're a team now, you and me. 2 dads. She's lucky. Most folks only get one." There wasn't a dry eye anywhere in that building. 2 dads, Raymond repeated softly. "I'd be honored, Walter. I'd be truly honored." "You come visit," Walter said. "Both of you. We'll have a cookout. I make a brisket that'll change your life." Raymond laughed through his tears. "I'll be there. You name the day." When the call ended, Steve stood there shaking his head, completely undone. "A man who raised another man's daughter," he said quietly, welcoming her real father into the family with open arms. "You don't see that every day. You don't see that hardly ever. That's grace, right there. That's just pure grace." He turned back to the families, all of them tangled together now in a loose, warm knot at the front of the stage, the Caldwells and Eleanor and even the Bennetts drifting in. "You know what gets me?" Steve said. "It's not just that they found each other. It's that they were the same the whole time. 49 years apart, 2 different cities, 2 different families, 2 different lives, and they both ended up being the kind of doctor who sits on the edge of the bed. They both ended up humming the same old songs. They both ended up crossing their ankles the same way." He shook his head slowly. "I think about all the people watching this at home who've got a question in their heart they're scared to ask. Somebody they lost touch with. A family member they never knew. A piece of themselves they can't quite name." He looked right into the camera. "And I want to tell you something. Be brave. Ask the question. Take the test. Make the call. Knock on the door. Because the worst thing that happens is nothing changes. But the best thing looks like this. SPA." He gestured at Raymond and Eleanor, father and daughter, holding on to each other on the steps of a game show stage. "The best thing," Steve said, "looks like a man who thought he was just playing a game finding out he's a father. Looks like a woman who spent 49 years wondering where she came from, finally getting to say the word dad out loud to somebody who's standing right in front of her." The studio was on its feet again, but this time nobody sat back down for a long while. Eleanor turned to her father one more time, and there was something shy in her face now, something almost girlish despite her years. "Can I ask you for one thing?" she said. "Anything," Raymond said. "Anything in the world. Can you just—" She hesitated. "I've never gotten to do this. I'm 49 years old, and I've never once gotten to do this. Can you just say my name? Just say, Eleanor, like a dad. Just once. I've heard a lot of people say my name, but I've never heard my father say it." Raymond's chin trembled. He took both of her hands in both of his, the way he must have taken 1,000 frightened patients' hands across 40 years, and he looked his daughter in the eyes. "Eleanor," he said, soft and steady and full of 50 years of love that hadn't had anywhere to go until that very second. "Eleanor, my daughter. and she closed her eyes and let out a breath she had in some way been holding her entire life. The taping went on for a long time after that, though it stopped being a taping in any real sense and became something more like a homecoming. Steve had the families pull chairs out onto the stage and just talk. Raymond told stories about his 40 years of practice, and Eleanor matched him story for story. They discovered they'd both kept handwritten thank you notes from patients in a shoebox, and they both pulled out their phones to show pictures of the boxes, and the boxes looked almost exactly the same. They discovered they had both, at different times, in different cities, decades apart, made house calls to elderly patients who couldn't make it in, long after most doctors had stopped doing such a thing. "You can't bill for it," Raymond said with a shrug, "but some folks, they just need you to come to them." "That's what I always say," Eleanor said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Word for word, that's what I always say." The wives, Marion, and the audience, the Bennetts, everyone simply could not get over it. Every new revelation brought a fresh wave of laughter and tears. Toward the end, when the energy had finally settled into a warm, exhausted glow, Steve asked one last question. "Raymond," he said, 40 years a doctor, 68 years on this earth, and today you found out you've got a daughter you never knew about. I gotta ask, after a day like this, after a surprise like this, how do you feel?" Raymond thought about it for a long moment. His arm around Eleanor, his wife on his other side, his children gathered close, this whole new shape his family had taken in the space of one afternoon. "I spent my whole life," Raymond said slowly, "telling my patients that the body is an amazing thing, that it knows how to heal, that you can break a bone and it'll knit itself back stronger. I believed it. I built my whole life on it." He paused, and his eyes filled one more time. "But I didn't know the heart could do that too. I didn't know you could have a piece missing for 49 years, a piece you didn't even know was gone, and then one afternoon it snaps back into place and you're whole. You're whole in a way you never were before, and you didn't even know you weren't whole." He kissed the top of his daughter's head. "I came here today to play a game with my family. I'm leaving here today with a bigger family than I walked in with. I don't have the words. I'm a doctor, not a poet. But I will tell you this, I am the luckiest man alive." "No," Eleanor said softly, leaning into him. "I'm the lucky one. I went looking for a name, and I found a dad." Steve stood there in the middle of it all, this man who had hosted thousands of shows and seen thousands of families, and for a long moment he didn't say anything at all. He just looked at them, a father and a daughter who had found each other against every odd. And he smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't come from the face, but from somewhere much deeper. "Folks," he finally said, turning to the camera, his voice quiet now, "we don't always get a day like this. Most days, we just play the game. We laugh, we go home. But every once in a while, this stage gives us something we'll carry forever. Today was one of those days." He looked back at Raymond and Eleanor one last time. "Go be a family, you two. You've got a lot of years to make up for, and from everything I've seen today, you're gonna do just fine." The applause rose one final time, warm and full and endless, and the Caldwell family, all of them, the old members and the brand new one, stood together at the front of the stage with their arms around each other.